A house is more than simply a collection of boards with walls, doors, windows, and a roof over the top of it all. There's a character in a dwelling that catches and cradles the essence of the people who've lived their lives inside it. And sometimes certain houses can become sanctuaries of sorts. They can become living monuments that whisper to new people who enter their doors. I have a memory. I have a story. I have a name that was given to me when I was built. Edgewood. Edgewood. It was men, both enslaved and free, who were responsible for my creation. A man known as Francis Pickens first oversaw my construction, but it was always the women I've known who've shaped my personality. Magnificent women, women of strong convictions, women who were forced to endure what no one should have had to endure, women with passionate ideals. They spent their lives here with me, and they so often spent much of their time out here on my veranda. Sometimes they would drift out here to just catch the evening's breeze or entertain neighbors who would stop by for a visit. But often they found themselves out here just to escape the voices infused with the language of oppression and the political tirades that reverberated within my rooms. But I'm getting ahead of my story, aren't I? Let me go way back, all the way back to the very beginning. As I recall, it was in the year 1829 when the former South Carolina Governor Andrew Pickens, Jr., with his son, Francis Wilkinson Pickens, began to prepare for my construction. Francis insisted that I be built on a secluded hilltop outside of Edgefield. They started to transport some of the strong, honey-colored planks of oak from the old Colonel's Cedar Fields plantation. His grand house had been badly damaged during the Revolutionary War, but Francis put them to good use once more. Margaret Eliza gave birth to 5 daughters and 2 sons. 4 of their girls lived to adulthood, but poor baby Frances never even survived to celebrate her first birthday, and our little Andrew departed this earth in his 2nd year. Perhaps the most cruel parting we ever had to bear was when their son Eldred succumbed to a congestive fever just days before his beloved mother followed him to heaven. And then Francis was lost, bereft, left here to care for his motherless daughters. Oh, the misery we endured then. Gone were the evenings of gaiety. Gone was the laughter of friends and the elaborate preparations made for the holidays. Gone was the mesmerizing aroma of tantalizing food. I found that I missed the amused expressions of the gentlemen as they exchanged their rowdy stories, smoky stories about the world outside my walls and far away from my fields. They bantered in their boisterous way as they talked of a thing called nullification. How they railed against the injustice of the federal trade tariffs that had been imposed upon them. This, they decided, could only be resolved by the secession of South Carolina. How could the South, the very center of agriculture, be treated so unfairly? All at once, it seemed, this energetic and perplexing activity was silenced, replaced, instead, with the sorrow of motherless girls, the confusion of a lonely husband, and the sympathy of loyal servants who were left behind without the mistress's daily orders. Then Francis would go away from home to chase after his political sirens, leaving his daughters in the capable hands of the tender, constantly attentive slave women he owned. These bondswomen cared for the master's children, not because they could be forced to, and not because it was what they were charged to do. No, they loved them because they were their children too. Their unfettered spirits were somehow remarkably able to take root and push their way up through the hard red clay of Edgefield, and in that place their ancestral wisdom would bloom, deeply enriching the lives of their captors. In those first 2 decades, I learned a great deal about human beings. I learned about what makes them happy. I found out about their pastimes and their celebrations. I saw their pride in the harvest, no matter the role they played in that arduous task. But sorrow visited Edgewood from time to time, causing pain to the families who called me and the land on which I stood home. They were confounded when the lack of rain or an excess of sun annihilated their crops. They were hopeless when their little ones succumbed to illnesses for which they had no weapons to fight. Even their very will to live was tested as fathers or mothers or brothers or sisters were traded or taken away from Edgewood. When I saw Francis's second wife, Marion, lose her battle for life, I saw hope flicker out inside him altogether. Until late in the summer of 1857, it was then that I saw love completely overtake and quite suddenly broadside the melancholy heart of Francis W. Pickens. Lucy Petway Holcomb, from Marshall, Texas, was often described as a lady who was preeminent for her beauty, intelligence, and accomplishments. Francis, at 52 years old, was secretly pining away for someone with whom he could share his life and who would heal the wounds of many personal losses.
The journey up the St. Johns River was sweet, but would have been even more so had I had some lovely being with whom to repose.
But never, even in his most secret dreams, did he imagine that he would have the good fortune to court a woman of such intoxicating beauty as the lively Miss Lucy. She arrived with her entourage, including her mother Eugenia and their servant Lucinda, at the Mecca of the seasonal resort hotels. White Sulphur Springs was the spot where the wealthy and those wishing to be so escaped the heat of the fever-laden southern summers. And Miss Lucy, at the ripe old age of 25, was rapidly approaching spinsterhood, or so those of her time believed. Francis Wilkinson Pickens watched with speechless admiration as this vision in gold floated toward him, and the twice-widowed congressman from South Carolina knew immediately that he wanted this woman to be his wife.
Why did we meet? I dream of thee by night and think of thee by day. The morning light wakes me to breathe thy name. The evening hour brings memories of thee. Thou hast the power to bind my spirit unto thine, till thought becomes a dream, with remembrance fraught.
Miss Lucy was spirited, beautiful, and bright, but she was above all these obvious qualities ambitious. Francis's large land and slaveholdings in several states made a mightier impression on her than his all too frequent letters of love and devotion. Just 6 years earlier, she had lost her heart to the handsome Colonel William Crittenden from Kentucky, a young soldier who was fated to be executed in Cuba.
There he was captured and put to death, but not before he refused to kneel to his executioners and proudly exclaimed, "A Kentuckian kneels to none except his God, and always dies facing his enemy."
The free flag of Cuba was Lucy's heartfelt and headstrong response to the loss of her true love in the filibustering expedition to Cuba. Writing under the pen name of H.M. Hardeman, Lucy wove exciting tales of brave and handsome martyrs. They fought in her book only for the freedom of the tiny island, fearlessly leading the resistance against the occupation of the Spanish tyrants.
What life is more sublime than one given to a nation struggling for the principles of moral and political freedom?
When no letter came from Lucy for 56 days, he gave up all hope of ever making Miss Holcomb the third Mrs. Pickens. Despite strong local support, Francis had lost his lead in the contentious race for the Senate seat to fellow plantation owner James Henry Hammond. Now, with no political agenda and not a word won from Miss Lucy, Francis made the decision to accept the ambassadorship to Russia offered to him by President Buchanan. He wrote one final letter, notifying Miss Holcomb that since he had not received a definite acceptance of his marriage proposal, he was off to assume the post of ambassador to Russia in May. Suddenly, out of the blue, Lucy agreed to marry Francis at Wyalusing, the Holcomb family home in Marshall, Texas, on April 26, 1858. Although it grieved her mother that she would marry the much older Francis, Lucy believed she was sacrificing what romantic love she may have hoped to find in order to secure her future and reverse her father's financial troubles. She was often heard to say,
"Submissiveness is not my role, but certain platitudes on certain occasions are among the innocent deceits of the sex."
May 8th, 1858 was the day I welcomed the lovely spirits that would become my closest companions for the next 4 decades. Lucy Petway Holcomb Pickens and Lucinda. Cinda, as she was called by the family, was given to Lucy by her mother as a wedding present. A gift of a human being was hard for me to understand, although this peculiar institution existed within my walls long before their arrival. The love I saw in Lucy's eyes was not for Francis, hardly for Francis. But I'd barely 1 week to get to know the sparkling step of Lucy's slippers on my floors, or to get a chance to introduce Cinda to the stillness of my parlor just at dusk, before they were all off again. Earlier that week, I had heard Francis tell his manservant, Tom, that Russia might be too inhospitable a climate for him. Francis also made it very clear to him that as they passed through New York, into Europe, and on to Russia, he would be considered a free man.
Master Colonel Pickens, your father, my old master, died in my arms on the banks of the Mississippi. I took from his pocket $1,300 and his gold watch, and I came on foot and brought it to you safely in Carolina. And if you die in Russia, you shall die in my arms, like your father.
So, passage was booked for the Pickens entourage aboard the British steamship Persia, the largest, most modern vessel afloat at the time. Charles Judkins was the charismatic captain. It took all his powers of persuasion to convince the new Mrs. Pickens to leave the safety of her New York hotel to sail on his ship to Europe. But leave America she eventually did. Ironically, it was Francis and the rest of the party who were languishing in their staterooms with seasickness. But not my Lucy. She felt utterly invigorated by the salt air. Finally, my little family arrived in St. Petersburg in July 1858. However, Lucy's royal greeting was far more than just cordial.
Lucy has been going with much company. At a large ball, the Emperor singled her out and led her to the stand reserved for the imperial family. Tom goes in full livery and is very much courted. He says to me that the other servants here in St. Petersburg think he is a king in his country, and I his prime minister.
But regardless of the warmth of the Russian welcome, Lucy was distressed with the blatant infidelity of the Tsar. Lucy decided to distract herself from her homesickness by teaching Tom, Cinda, and her new husband to speak French. And so she set about tutoring them. Tom and Lucinda were quick studies. Francis, on the other hand, did not share their innate ability to master languages other than his own.
Bonjour.
When the Tsarina discovered that Lucy was expecting a child, she demanded the best medical care for her dear new friend. Oh, yes, there was some speculation that her child might be the offspring of the Tsar, but a single look at the baby's face, and it was evident that this was indeed the daughter of Francis and a relative of the red earth of Edgefield. The Tsarina proclaimed herself the godmother, adding the names Olga and Neva to the Francis Eugenia her parents had already given her. It was her Russian wet nurse, Mumka, who ultimately called her by the name that would follow her for the rest of her life, Dooshka, or Little Darling. However, the royal celebrations and whispered innuendos did nothing but magnify the abject heartsickness of my Lucy.
If Colonel Pickens had said, "Take your child and go to your mother. Go rather than suffer such agony," if he had done this, I would have felt bound to him forever.
The frigid Russian winter proved too much for Francis. Lucy had made a solemn promise to herself that she would take her baby girl and leave Russia. When Francis became deathly ill, she repented of her incessant harping.
Never judge harshly of me, for you cannot see or understand my situation.
Then, after almost 3 years, Lucy and her family were home again. Her life as the mistress of Edgewood was finally about to begin. But within the month, her new rank as the wife of the governor would blow over her like the blustery autumn winds of this November day in 1860.
If I know the pulse of South Carolina, if I know the pulse of Southern men, the great heart of the South is beating steadily to the march of Southern independence.
Governor Francis W. Pickens emerged as the man who stood at the center of the discordant storm that had been brewing between the North and South for decades. He was the figurehead who showed that there was more than idle talk backing up the endless threats. He was the one to declare the state of South Carolina the first of the 11 to secede from the federal union and establish a confederation. President Abraham Lincoln's attempt to provide supplies to Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor was the end of the line. It was the fuse that, when ignited, would explode with an earth-shattering bellow. And that fuse was lit on April the 12th, 1861. The resulting conflict would split the nation and cement the distinctive identity of the South that lingers to this very day. The struggle raged for a bloody and divisive 4 years. Its outcome forever changed Lucy, her husband, and the destiny of the 300 enslaved people who lived in me and on the land where I stood. Although she gladly sold some of the exquisite jewelry given to her by the Tsar to support the cause, Lucy was uneasy when people began to call her the Queen of the Confederacy. In appreciation, the Holcomb Legion bore her maiden name on the flag she had made from one of her blue silk ball gowns.
Death comes but once to all. Then how can a man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods?
But it seems that a legion of warriors was not quite enough homage to the Queen. So the Confederate Secretary of the Treasury ordered that Lucy's image was to be engraved on some of the paper currency. Now, a year and some months into the war, President Lincoln announced an executive order that struck at the very heart of slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation was issued on January 1st, 1863, and it stated that all slaves were now free people. This edict became the key issue of the Civil War. Freedom is a good thing, the right action, of course. Why then was it such a difficult road for those who chose to follow it? Tom Lee, whose whole life prior to the proclamation had been devoted to the Pickens family, decided to take the road to the north. And I've heard he has family who reside there to this day. But this one man's freedom left Francis alone to contemplate the new South that appeared to him as a broken wagon wheel. Although most of the Confederate leaders had been pardoned by the federal government, Francis was not among them. His former slaves had been given the right to vote, but he no longer possessed that right himself. The world had been turned bottom rail on top. Francis was a man out of time. In the winter of 1869, he finally gave up the ghost. Former Governor Francis Wilkinson Pickens left this world a man without a country. His beloved Edgefield County was divided up to make way for a Union-led Reconstruction area. The new county, called Aiken, was to be administered by elected black statesmen supported by the federally backed Freedmen's Bureau. And although General Matthew Culbraith Butler begged for her to rent me out or sell me so she could move past her grief, Her answer was a firm,
I will never, with God's help, shirk my duty or betray the sacred trust reposed in me by the noblest and best of men, my kindest and dearest husband.
Oh, but then, for the next few years, there was again the laughter that I had missed so very much. There were the gentlemen, the cousins, the nieces, and the nephews. Then there were the grandchildren of all shades of skin color who sang holiday songs again. There was so much joy, despite those particular hard times when it appeared as if I'd be lost because of mounting debts. But Lucy parted with more of her jewelry, depended on the kindness of former beaux, and always found a way to endure, to survive. Known as Mamie to her darling Dooshka and Duchess to the other house servants, Cinda spent her life here reading and writing in several languages. Yes, Cinda stayed, even though she was now legally free to go. The peculiar institution of slavery had bound Lucy, Dooshka, and Cinda together like a tapestry where one color blends into the next so no one can see the shift in the yarn. And I was home to her. Dooshka was always the fearless and the funny one. And for all the perilous stunts she performed on the back of a horse and her participation in the infamous ride of 1876, it somehow seemed unthinkable that a summer fever in August of 1893 suddenly ended her life. Her passing left an emptiness that could never quite be filled again for Cinda or Lucy. Lucy did give it a valiant try.
We do not forget. The vacant chair never loses its pathos and pain for us. The dear voice, silent in death, still speaks to our constant heart.
And even though Cinda had married in 1880, she found it hard to leave Lucy alone in her grief, when in fact she wasn't alone at all. My doors were open to almost any visitor who happened by. But sometimes it's only the closest of friends or the most beloved of confidants who are able to find that one gentle look, that single soft word that keeps a spirit from flickering out altogether. They both survived another 6 years. Then almost to the very date when they had lost their Dooshka, suddenly they died. Lucy on August 8th, 1899, and Cinda just 3 days later on August 11th. All that was left for me to do was wait. And that I did. I lay for a long, long time, like a fallow field waiting for the seeds of a new crop to be planted. All that time, though, people were still attracted to me. It was as if I was some kind of dusty crystal ball that they could peer into and watch the past. And every so often, someone would find the red velvet cape, Dooshka's cape, the one she wore for her ride with her Uncle Matthew Butler, General Gary, in their notorious red shirts. That red cape became a symbol of her infatuation with the idea that the red shirts could somehow win back the South from the invading carpetbaggers. Cinda had been as much a mother to Dooshka as had Lucy. Still, She was a member of the greater Negro populace, and because of her skin color, she was kin to the males who had been granted the legal right to vote by the United States Constitution. But not on that particular election day in 1876, if some of the gentle men of Edgefield could help it. And Dooshka? Why, her father had perished in disgrace. Her mother was forever recounting romantic stories to her about how proper the South used to be before the Yankees ruined it all. She was simply a teenaged girl who thought she could resurrect the blissful halcyon days of her family. That fabled time when King Francis and Queen Lucy reigned over the royal court of Edgewood, a ransacked kingdom to which she had been the next heir. Yet the men with whom she rode that day would, only a few years later, raise their voices with resentment when women like Dooshka demanded their right to vote. They would make it as difficult for women as they were making it for the new voters who were waiting at the Edgefield courthouse. They all rode toward the freed black men on that crisp autumn day. Men who, without redirection, might be tempted to cast their vote against Wade Hampton. Although Dooshka later married, the fiery constitution she inherited from both parents proved too intense for the union. Just a mere 25 years after her ride, Dooshka's youngest daughter, named Eulalie Pickens Dooshka, was still considered Edgefield aristocracy. So it was no surprise to the townfolk when she married B.R. Tillman in 1903. He was the son of a famous state governor, known in the Senate as Pitchfork Ben Tillman. But while Lucy lay ill in a Washington hospital in 1909, her estranged husband did something that sent shockwaves through the hearts of women everywhere. He abducted the little girls from their sick mother. With the help of his father, who was now a senator, and the advice of an Edgefield judge, B.R. was able to unearth a little-known loophole in the law. A law that permitted him to give over the legal guardianship of his daughters to his parents without the consent of their mother. So she sold the last of the Russian jewelry bestowed on Miss Lucy by the Tsar and pawned the pearls from Francis. Upon regaining her physical health, Mrs. Tillman discovered that she would have to hire legal counsel to regain the custody of her children. Nationwide, women were incensed. The Tillman case proved that a husband actually could deed away children from their mothers like property. Not so different from the system of slavery that had just been defeated. Unthinkable. Lucy Dooshka Tillman, the granddaughter of Francis and Lucy Pickens, did prevail at last. She got her daughters back and focused attention on a wide gulf in women's rights, but she was left in financial ruin. She could no longer afford my upkeep, and I was left to wait out here, prey to the elements, to the trespassers, and to time itself. 20 long years with no attention paid to the unforgiving lash of the wind on my fading paint.
Lucy!
Are you here?
Upon seeing her, I exhaled for the first time in so many years. Who was this bold new woman breathing life into my dusty rooms? I heard the other people who followed her into my entry hall call after her, Eulalee. She bought me from those who held the Tillman estate. She was angry that with my pedigree I should be so neglected. It was going to be a challenge for her to find the money to revitalize me, but a challenge she welcomed. We belonged to each other. She knew it, and I knew it from almost the very moment we met. My fate, it was clear, was not to remain where I had been born, where I had seen so many women and their men come and go. I wasn't meant to spend one more minute reminiscing about what had once been, or the people who were never coming back to me. It was a new century, and I was being moved piece by piece to a town just 15 miles south of Edgefield called Aiken, the place Eulalee called home. Around me were acres of rolling hills and woodlands in a place called Calmia Hill that had once belonged to William Gregg. Just down in the valley was Graniteville, Gregg's giant cotton mill and planned village, and the foundation on which I was being set had once held supplies and munitions to support the cause of the Confederacy. The Great Depression of 1929 slowed my rehabilitation just a bit. Eulalee's husband, Julian, insisted that she must stop the work, that she must be sensible, that they had lost everything.
But Eulalee, we're broke.
Everything we've got, we made. And now we have experience. We'll start over.
Eulalie Salley had never been one to let a little thing like reality stand in her way. You see, reality had been that the women of America had no rights that were recognized by the men who governed them. Reality had also been that women in South Carolina could, by law, be beaten by their husbands as long as the thickness of the rod was no bigger than the diameter of his thumb. Eulalee was furious about the Tillman ruling. She begged Julian, who was both an attorney and the mayor of Aiken at the time, to explain how the law could deny a mother her children.
Could you take my children from me?
Well, if the law is on the books, it ought to be enforced. A woman is subject to man.
Eulalee was never one to sit demurely by and wait quietly for the world to change. This was the time to take a bold stand. She promptly sent in her $1 to become a card-carrying member of the South Carolina Equal Suffrage League. Soon, she was the president of the Aiken chapter.
That was the best dollar I ever spent.
And there was practically nothing my Eulalee wouldn't do to gain attention for the cause, much to the delight of her children and much to the chagrin of her bewildered husband.
Are you going to disgrace me again?
Even though Eulalee often made her husband out to be a straight-laced curmudgeon, he was often the man behind the woman more than he admitted. In fact, he helped replace the original moldings that were stolen from me while I was abandoned. Now, I wear elegant French woodwork secured from an old coastal plantation. It was hand-carved by 17th century cabinet makers who used only penknives as tools. So once again, I became the hub in the wheel of a powerful woman's life. The motto for the Eulalie Salley Real Estate Company was,
"We do everything but brush your teeth. Can I help you?"
and women were her favorite clients. She drew people to her. Her magnetism emanated from her comfortable charm, her nimble retorts, and her exceptional ability to transform every moment into an exhilarating event. One such person was a writer with whom she had begun a friendship at Winthrop College in 1923. Julia Mood Peterson was also there, taking a class in short story writing. She'd been writing stories about the intricate lives of the people of the Gullah heritage on her plantation called Lang Syne. She won a Pulitzer Prize in 1929 for her novel, Scarlet Sister Mary. Then there were the winter people, as the locals called them, the ultra-wealthy children of the northern industrial giants who had discovered the charms of Aiken after the Civil War. But it was their passion for their horses and their fondness of the mild winters that drew them back, and back to Aiken. They built their elaborate cottages, complete with billiard rooms and libraries, the mansions which Eulalee sold over and over as each group of yearly Northerners discovered her hometown. Seymour Knox II was among these seasonal visitors. Known to his friends as Shorty because of his small stature, he was a born enthusiast, and his chief interests were polo and modern art. Mrs. Evelyn Walsh McLean was the pampered daughter of a Colorado prospector who owned not only the Washington Post, but also the Hope Diamond. The huge blue diamond had been stolen by a French treasure hunter from a Hindu temple in the 1600s, or so the legend goes. The temple priests pronounced a curse on whomever might possess the missing stone in the future. Mrs. McLean not only owned the jewel, but wore it to virtually every function that she attended, even fashioned a special collar so her dog could wear it, and sent Eulalie scrambling to find all 45 carats of it for her when she misplaced it.
Okay.
I left the house.
All right, Evelyn.
Would you
I
get
will.
darling and see if you can find it?
Okay.
Yes, just look in all the usual places.
Yes, Evelyn. Bye.
It's bound to show up. Doesn't it always, dear?
Then a man, a very sinister man indeed, set his sights on her for a diabolical and disastrous scheme. His name well fit his persona, Mr. Means. This Gaston Means had been a government man at one time, so when he told Evelyn and Eulalie that he had information about the infant kidnapped from Charles Lindbergh and his wife, it seemed somewhat plausible. For the sum of $100,000, he told them, he would convince the kidnapper to turn the child over to him in Mexico. After the abductor had time to escape, Mr. Means would meet Evelyn there and hand over the Lindbergh baby. But it was all a hoax. The poor child was already dead, and Evelyn McLean had been swindled because it seems her heart was as big as the legend of her blue diamond.
December 7th, 1941.
War came again to my people. And although this time it was fought in faraway lands, The heaviness of its presence seemed to be felt everywhere. Eulalie, along with thousands of other women, saw her son leave home to fight on foreign soil. There was little to do but wait and take what comfort she could from her close friend, Lucy Mercer Rutherford. Mrs. Rutherford relayed the tiny bits of hope she could from an exceptional man who knew, better than anyone else on earth, the true progress of the war.
Darling, so today is D-Day. After Roosevelt's speech last night, I don't believe anything has ever happened that creates as many conflicting emotions. The whole nation seems to be on its knees today. All radio programs have been thrown to the wind, and war news comes in every 5 minutes. If they would only tell me where you are and that you are safe. May God give you the ability to give the greatest aid to this noble cause. Above all, may He carry you through this ordeal by fire and bring you back a better and finer man to a mother who loves you so dearly. Affectionately, Mother.
President Truman revealed that Russia had tested her first atomic bomb.
Then something quite extraordinary happened right after the war ended. In 1950, the federal government asked E.I. DuPont to build and operate a plutonium production plant near the Savannah River to refine materials for nuclear weapons. The people who had lived and farmed around the larger towns of Ellington and Dunbarton would be forced to find other homesteads. But to Eulalie, this was progress. This was a challenge, and this meant that the thousands of incoming construction people would need housing in a hurry.
Shopping centers were built in Augusta, Georgia, and in...
While the newcomers struggled to make Aiken feel like their new home, the locals, along with the winter colony folks, fought to come to terms with the sudden invasion of their lovely little town. Eulalie was not only able to find the new homes quickly, but she was also, somehow, able to come up with some solutions to the tension that everyone felt with this march of progress. Julian Sr. left us in 1951, and Eulalie softly whispered her hopes to me.
I hope he's on the front bench in heaven, because the Lord knows he deserves it for putting up with me all these years.
In some ways, women in my second life were bound by more restrictive gossamer chains than Lucy or Cinda ever wore. Eulalie's passion for women's suffrage had guided the course of her life, but more often than not, she followed her mentor's directive to be a white-gloved lady rather than a rambunctious revolutionary. The same man who had convinced his own son to strip away the rights of his daughter-in-law, Lucy Tillman, had also been influential in restricting the rights of other Southern citizens. Whereas once women and men of both races had occupied my rooms, now there was a decided separation, a breach. Although Eulalie always held on to her progressive visions for women, other inequities were automatically overwritten by her culture.
Black
and white together.
Still, there were those people who kept on explaining how much more all humans are alike than they are different. And I noticed once again that really significant changes seem to travel at a snail's pace. For all the hard work that she and other courageous women had done to finally secure the vote for women, the legislature had not yet formally sanctioned the 19th Amendment to the Constitution in South Carolina. But Eulalie never stopped reminding them that they had snubbed ratification, and she never forgave them either. After a 50-year wait, Governor Robert McNair finally signed the amendment with Eulalie looking over his shoulder. He then refused to give her the pen as a keepsake.
You careless little boys. I've been waiting 50 years to tell you what I think of you. I think I should have been a man, or have been born 50 years later, for from now on, women are going to be so much more on their own than ever before. My granddaughters will live in the most wonderful era. They will get the benefits of true women's emancipation. And one of them may be president yet.
Miss Lucy would drop in from time to time. This was her house, too, explained Eulalie when she got a little too rambunctious. Just as had happened to every human before her, Eulalie had to leave me, too. In March of 1975, it was like being awakened from a dream to find myself suddenly alone again. When Eulalie's estate was settled in 1985, I was finally sold to a real estate developer. Then I reached out with all the feelings I'd learned to express from my humans. Save me. Don't let me be alone again. I want life. I want laughter. I want to cradle people again. But where can an old house go that sits in a grove of oaks, just waiting for modern houses to take her place? I met new people who loved history and worked diligently to make sure that my name was not lost, but became linked with those whom I had loved and who had loved me. It took vision. It took hard work. It took commitment, until at last, a dedicated group of people, including Eulalie's son, made sure that I would only be moved just one last time. So once more, I was carried to new ground, where I awakened to a new purpose. Only blocks from where I stood on Calmia Hill, the University of South Carolina, Aiken, offered me a place where I could stay forever. Now, all kinds of people walk my floors, and each day I whisper my memories to those who come in and out of my doors. In some way, they can sense how time has moved through me. And to those new people who inhabit the same rooms where Lucy, Cinda, Dooshka, and Eulalie once lived, I have more than enough tales to tell about the remarkable spirits who resided in this very space before them. As Eulalie once said,
Don't you know that the things of this world are only loaned to us for a little while?
as were all of those souls who were on loan to me and who have given me a memory, who have given me a story, who have given me a name.